This video is brought to you by Ground News. Pakistan has long been considered the Taliban's closest state benefactor since the group's inception around 30 years ago. The relationship has largely endured through the Taliban's time in and out of power in Afghanistan, but since retaking the country in August 2021, relations between the Taliban and Pakistan have deteriorated sharply, reaching a new low last month when Pakistan ordered some 1.7 million undocumented Afghans to leave Pakistan by November the 1st, or face deportation. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the history between the Taliban and Pakistan, explain why things are getting worse, and how Pakistan's Taliban strategy backfired. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with some history. The Taliban, which translates from Pashto to students, emerged in the early 1990s, having been formed by Afghan mujahideen, who were Islamic guerrillas that had fought against the Soviet Union's invasion and occupation of Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. During their fight against the Soviets, the Mujahideen received significant material support from both the United States and neighbouring Pakistan, and the Taliban was actually founded in 1994 by someone who'd been trained by Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or ISI, in the 1980s. Pakistan's ISI provided his nascent group with military and financial assistance, and many of its recruits came from Afghan refugees studying in Islamic religious schools, known as madrasas, in Pakistan. When the Taliban conquered Kabul in 1996 and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, it received international recognition from just 3 countries: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Pakistan. Ever since, Pakistan has maintained relations with the Taliban, even after the US invaded and forced the Taliban out of Kabul in 2001. Unsurprisingly, this became a point of contention between Pakistan and the US, but Pakistan was unwilling to cut ties with the Taliban for at least 3 reasons. First, the 2 countries have close cultural and historical links. The Taliban are predominantly ethnic Pashtuns, and Pashtuns make up a majority not just in southern Afghanistan, but also in parts of northern Pakistan, which is one of the reasons creating a functional Afghanistan-Pakistan border has been so difficult. Second, the Pakistani army and intelligence services see the Taliban as a regional counterbalance against India, and are essentially independent from the Pakistani government. This means that even if the US could convince the Pakistani government to cut ties with the Taliban, this wouldn't change the army's foreign policy. But the third, and perhaps the most important reason Pakistan maintained ties with the Taliban was stability. Even before they returned to power, the Taliban still had influence in southern Afghanistan, and Pakistan needed to keep them on side to prevent them from hosting and exporting terror groups from Afghanistan into Pakistan, including most notably the Pakistani Taliban, or TTP, who've waged a violent insurgency against the Pakistani state since 2007. When the Taliban returned to power in 2021, Pakistani officials apparently expected the Taliban to repay them for their support by cracking down on other terror groups operating out of Afghanistan, including the TTP. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Taliban mediated negotiations between the TTP and Pakistan, which led to a ceasefire from August until December of 2021. But once the ceasefire expired, the TTP increased attacks against Pakistan. Pakistan suspects the Taliban of supporting the TTP, and Pakistan-Taliban relations hit a new low in April when Pakistan carried out airstrikes at suspected TTP locations inside Afghanistan, but ended up killing civilians. Despite a brief ceasefire towards the end of last year, TTP attacks have continued to escalate in the last few months, including a series of devastating suicide bombings in recent months. This problem has been exacerbated by Pakistan's economic woes, because the government knows it can't afford a sustained high-intensity campaign, especially outside Pakistan. The 2 countries have also been arguing over their border, known as the Durand Line, drawn by the British in 1893. Like previous rulers, the Taliban refused to recognise the more than 2,600-kilometre border with Pakistan, arguing that it artificially divides the Pashtun community. But Pakistan insists it's necessary for regional stability and the integrity of the Pakistani state. Since the Taliban took over in 2021, there have been incidents on the border, including clashes and skirmishes between Taliban and Pakistani forces. On one occasion, Taliban officials attempted to disrupt Pakistani forces working on the border fence which the Taliban opposes. Another incident arose out of the Taliban attempting to build what Pakistan called an unlawful structure on the Pakistani side of the border. The Taliban has also accused Pakistan of allowing the US to operate drones out of Pakistan to target suspected terrorists within Afghanistan, including the July 2022 drone strike that killed al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul. Anyway, with relations rapidly deteriorating, last month Pakistan's caretaker government abruptly announced that all undocumented Afghans living in Pakistan should leave the country by November the 1st or else face deportation. For context, roughly 1.7 million Afghans live in Pakistan, with waves of migrants fleeing every Afghanistan conflict since the Soviet invasion, including some 600,000 who fled Afghanistan when the Taliban took back power in 2021. Unsurprisingly, plans have been met with widespread criticism from international bodies and rights groups, and if anything close to 1.7 million people leave under pressure or are deported, then it would almost certainly be the largest unlawful mass forced return of refugees in recent times, given that that is how Human Rights Watch described the driving of nearly 600,000 Afghans out of Pakistan in 2016. The Taliban are also unhappy with Pakistan's plan, branding it as unacceptable. So why exactly has Pakistan ordered this? Well, there are essentially two reasons. The main reason, and the one articulated by the Pakistani government, is security. The vast majority of TTP members are Afghans. According to Pakistan's Interior Ministry, 14 out of the 24 suicide bombings in Pakistan since January have been carried out by Afghan nationals. And the Pakistani government will be hoping that expelling Afghans will reduce the risk of further attacks and remove the TTP support base in the region. But the second is to punish the Taliban. Pakistan know that the Taliban can't afford to host another 1.7 million people, and they'll be hoping that the deportations will put pressure on them to stop supporting the TTP. Nonetheless, while there might be a logic to this policy, it's still a risky strategy. While Pakistan has to do something to push back against the TTP, upsetting the Taliban risks provoking further escalation, and there have already been reports of Taliban fighters joining the TTP. In retrospect, it does look like Pakistan's earlier policy of tacitly supporting the Taliban in defiance of the US has slightly backfired, and it's hard to see this crisis resolving itself anytime soon. Keeping track of this will require following a number of different news stories from a wide range of outlets. This is all possible thanks to our sponsor Ground News, a website and app designed to help you take the power of the media into your own hands. Here's how it works. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world. They then organise these articles by story. For each and every story, you can see the number of reporting sources, where these sources lean on the political spectrum at an individual level and group level, compare the headlines of each source, and read each article all without ever leaving the app. For example, here's a story relevant to today's video topic: sharp increases in Afghans leaving Pakistan due to illegal migrant crackdown. Right away, you can see that the story had 19 outlets reporting on it. 25% lean left, while another 25% lean right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. You can also swipe through some of the headlines to get a more detailed understanding of how reporting might change based on political bias. I especially like the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. And this is where information like the factuality score or ownership information becomes so important, because sometimes there's a reason that only one side of the political spectrum is reporting on a story. But at the end of the day, isn't it important to see stories like this, even if we might disagree with them? Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. You can get their Pro subscription for $1 a month, but our team at TLDR News likes Ground News so much that we've decided to offer 30% off the Ground News Vantage plan to all our viewers. That's under $6 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.